Greetings and welcome back. We continue with our conversation on page 126, 127 of your hymnal in Senior English A Chaucer study. We are looking now to the questions that will be resurrected in our study of the Pardoner's Prologue. Chaucer, the great satirical iconoclast, that attacker of sacred ideas and institutions, is here going to raise several major questions. There's any number of ways to try to address his political agenda. Let's go ahead and put it in our notes at 2A with a couple of different observations. Question 1. Who is Chaucer writing this for? Okay? Who is Chaucer writing this Pardoner's Prologue for? In other words, let's ask it this way for your notes. Put it in your notes this way at 2A. What audience is Chaucer trying to reach? What audience is Chaucer trying to reach? A second question, one that we have often debated in 303. Chaucer in many ways is going to resurrect this question, and it is this one. Do you separate message from messenger? So I would write that question down. Be looking at it. We'll obviously kind of explain it as we go. Can you separate message from messenger, or are they rather, in your estimation, symbiotic? In other words, one and the same. Let me give you an example. The father who says to his son, the father, smoking, says to his son, "You should not smoke, son," as the father is smoking. To which the son responds, "Dude, you're the messenger, and the message is don't smoke. But you are smoking as you are telling me the message. Because you're smoking as you're telling me the message, clearly I don't buy anything you're telling to me." In other words, you see the message and the messenger are the same, symbiotic. In other words, let's write it in our notes this way. Bad messenger, bad message. Bad messenger, dad smoking, bad message. Son's not going to listen. He's going to say, "Dude, are you kidding me? You're telling me to not do the very thing that you're doing. Screw you, I'll do what I want." Or rather, do you separate message from messenger? The father telling the son, "Don't smoke," is a good message. Whether the father is smoking or not, it's got nothing to do with it. The kid should listen to the father because the message is a good message, even if the messenger is flawed. The message is a good message, and therefore we ought to be able to separate message from messenger. Or are they rather one in the same? Now, of course, these two questions obviously go together, and we will try to somehow get some sense of how they are profoundly important questions in the history of thought. Let's begin first of all, though, with this question. What is Chaucer doing when he is trying to use satire to reach an audience? What audience? Which audience? Now let's think about this for a moment. Chaucer could be intending to reach at least two different audiences. Let's write them down at 2A. The first audience Chaucer could be intending to reach would simply be those who are in the church itself. That is to say, the religious. In other words, Chaucer could be, in some ways, attacking the hypocrisy of members of the religious clergy by showing a really bad example. A priest that says, "I could care less what happens to their souls after they die. Dude, they can go to hell and go blackberry picking for all I care. I want their money before they die. And then, that way, I can afford more beer and more girls at the bar." A bad model of a bad priest could make any number of priests within the church who are kind of trending in that direction say, "This is bad behavior. I'm not going to do it anymore." In other words, let's put it in our notes this way. One audience potentially for Chaucer, he's trying to reform those in the church. He's trying to tell them through this negative example, don't be like this guy, right? Don't be like this guy. Don't be dishonest. don't be hypocritical, etc., etc. Okay? In an interesting way, right, Chaucer has already told us in the general prologue that he really likes the good parson because the good parson is the opposite of this part. In an interesting way, Chaucer could be complimenting the parson and religious people in the church who are like him, in other words, they're authentic, right, by showing us an inauthentic priest. Okay? So that's one answer to the question, who is potentially Chaucer's audience? A second answer is far more interesting and far more disturbing. That second answer is the yokels. Let's write this one down. Chaucer is wanting to reach the yokels, as the partner calls them. The normal people, the laity is the term that's often referenced to these people. The people who just go to church. The people who go to church, sit out there in the pews, and believe that the people who are in front of them in the church are authentic. They're real. They are to be trusted. Now think about what Chaucer does. He presents a church religious who is obscenely immoral, who is completely inauthentic, yes? Now how does that work for the yokels? How does that work for the people, commoners, the laity who sit out there in the church pews? Now the answer here is interesting, and it's problematic, so let's take a few notes, shall we? It's not unlike the kind of undercover journalism that we sometimes see now today, where, for example, a video camera hidden can show information about what's going on by some kind of immoral action, some kind of inauthentic person. I think earlier in the lecture we even mentioned a bad mechanic. So for example, you can bring a car in, have the hidden camera, the mechanic will say your car has all these terrible things wrong with it, when in fact there's nothing wrong with the car at all. In other words, he's exploiting the ignorance or the stupidity of somebody who brings the car in. And then they put this on television, and you are somebody who knows nothing about mechanics, right? And you watch this, and then you have to take your car in. You are being educated about the potentiality of inauthenticity. That is to say, there could be people out there who actually maybe are not everything they appear to be. The yokels, in other words, are being educated by Chaucer to, on some level, let's write it down this way, distrust the clergy. Distrust the priests. Distrust the church. But now let's get to the problematic component of Chaucer's project. And by the way, there were any number of people, of even Chaucer's contemporaries, who pointed out what I'm about to say. Here's the problem. Once you've watched an undercover journalism expose about bad mechanics, you are forever going to always have that seed of doubt in your mind. Would you agree with me? In your mind, the seed of doubt that every time you take your car in to be worked on by a mechanic who especially you don't know, and the mechanic says, there's some issues, you're going to have that seed of doubt in your mind. That is to say, can I trust them? Are they authentic? Whereas before you saw the documentary, your assumption was anyone who's a mechanic has that pass certain credentialing. They're always going to tell me the truth. They're always going to give me the right kind of information. And there's no way a mechanic out there who works, for example, for an established car dealership, for example, would ever try and swindle or take money from me. I can totally trust them. But after you've watched the undercover documentary, now all of a sudden, questions arise in your mind. The beginning of doubt. Let's write it in our notes in an academic formulation as the following. Chaucer provides for many readers the beginning of religious skepticism. The beginnings of religious skepticism. If, for example, you grew up in a house Where when you were young, you ask maybe the person raising you, hey, how come on Sundays we never go to no church? I went and stayed at my friends and they go to church. Why don't we go to... And you were raised by somebody who said, they're all a bunch of swindlers and crooks. We don't do that church thing. Right? The obvious question is, where would an idea like that have come from? That everybody in the church is swindlers and wanting money. Now we come back to Chaucer. And we come back to the partner's prologue, where you have a partner, a religious man saying, they can all go to hell and blackberry pick for all I care. I just want their money before they go. He even says it himself, I am a holy, vicious, nasty man. And yet he says it. I can still tell a moral tale. In fact, he says it, I'm really good at saving people's souls from greed by preaching against greed, and then they give me the money so I can make money. I am greedy, but I save them from greed. Now, of course, this is one of those really interesting and disturbing questions, and we'll ask it this way at 2a. Is Chaucer doing a good thing by exposing the inauthenticity of the church? Or is he rather doing a terrible thing because he raises doubts about the legitimacy of the church? Now, of course, this is a question that will get asked over and over again. We like to think of it in the American literary tradition in that most classic of texts, Hawthorn's Scarlet Letter. Let's pause for a moment, jump down to 3a, and let's remind ourselves of this genius text. For those of you that have not yet read Scarlet Letter, please, spoiler alert, coming. Brilliant story. At the beginning of the story, we have a young woman standing in the center of a town. This is set in a time in early America when a woman is not allowed to sleep with someone until she is married to that someone. This woman has had a child, but she has no husband. She is standing on the scaffolding in the center of town. She is holding her child. On her chest is a large red scarlet A. A for adultery, hanky-panky, sleeping with someone who's not your husband. She is in front of the entire town. The preacher, Rev Dimmesdale, steps up in front of the whole group and says, you, young lady, have committed a terrible sin. You have slept with a man who was not your wife. You became pregnant by that man, and you had the child. It's there in your hands. Who is the father of the child? I demand that you tell us now. To which she says, no. And he says, I am a man of God. You will tell us now. Who is the father of this child? And again she says, no. I love him too much. I will not tell. One last time, Dimmesdale says, I am begging you, for your own soul, tell us who it is. And she says, not going to happen. She lives outside of the community for the next number of years. Outside of the community. She is castigated. She is treated by all of the people as a person of no value. And she raises her little girl. The reader slowly, Hawthorn's genius in this regards, the reader slowly comes to realize that the father of the child is the reverend who was standing in the beginning of the book, right in front of her. Dimmesdale is the father of the child. Dimmesdale and Hester had a relationship rooted in love. Whoops! Dimmesdale, the reverend, is demanding of her in front of everyone, call me out. Tell him it's me. And she says, not going to happen. I love you too much. Whoa! A brilliant story, but raising a very disturbing question. What kind of man would put his woman and his child in front of the entire town and then not tell? What kind of man? Is that a weak, cowardly man who would let his wife, not wife, girl, stand in front of the whole town and they can make fun of her and they can ridicule her, and they will treat her terribly. What kind of man would let that happen? Clearly not a man who loves her. Hawthorn goes, no, 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 no. It ain't that easy. He totally loves her and his child. Well, then why doesn't he just step up and say, I'm the guy, I'm the guy? His answer is very disturbing. He says it this way, I'm not just her lover. I'm not just the father of that child. I am the reverend, the priest, the preacher of this entire community. They look up to me. When they see me, they think about a good religious. I have to make sure they do not lose their faith. The way he reasons is this. I've already lost my own soul. I've damned myself to hell. But there is no way that I am going to let people lose their faith and therefore go to hell. Remember, during this time, people really believe in hell and an afterlife of eternal damnation and punishment. It is a serious concern to be in any way responsible for somebody else going to hell. So are you ready for this? Dimmesdale lies because he wants to save the souls of the people in his church. His fear is, if they find out I slept with a girl and had a child, they will begin to not have the same quality of faith in a religious man, in the church. They could lose their faith and ultimately go to hell because they lose their faith. Therefore, I will not at all share. No way. Not going to do it. Question. Did he do the right thing? Or did he do the wrong thing? The genius of a greatly written novel, right? Hawthorn leaves us on the hook. The story itself, of course, ends even more dramatically. Are you ready for this? She did have a husband. No, not this guy. Another guy. And he is coming. We're in America. He is coming. He arrives. When he arrives, his wife has a child. And he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not my child. No, it is not. Well, whose child is it? I'm not saying. What do you mean you're not saying? You will say. I'm your husband. You'll tell me. She says, no, I will not say. He begins to snoop around. His best friend becomes Dimmesdale, the preacher. He slowly begins to realize that Dimmesdale is the man. The question, of course, is, does he expose Dimmesdale as the man? Because if you expose Dimmesdale, you may be responsible for some people no longer believing in the church and therefore going to eternal damnation. At the very end of the novel, the genius, I hope, if you have not read this novel, I hope that you pick it up and read it someday. At the end of the novel, two things. Dimmesdale in a scene is shown without his shirt. The reverend, the preacher. On his chest, he has burned with a red-hot poker a red A that he scars into his own chest. To mirror, of course, his girl's red A that she's worn all her life on her dress. Number two, at the very end of the novel, they are reunited on the scaffolding. And Dimmesdale's heart cannot take the duplicity anymore. And the tragedy, of course, at the end of the novel is that at the final moment when they're all three together, lovers and child, that Dimmesdale then will die. At the very end of the novel, in an afterword, Hawthorn will make the observation that Dimmesdale from the very beginning should have been true. But this does beg a really difficult question. If you know something about someone of tremendous respect and high esteem, but that individual has done something immoral or terribly wrong, let's say, for example, abused children sexually, do you make that fact public? Even though people might no longer believe or respect the institution anymore. In other words, is Chaucer doing the right thing by exposing the church? Because some yokels, after they read this, or they hear this part of the prologue, They may go to church the next time, and all of a sudden a priest steps up and says, hey, 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 you are in sin. You need to be forgiven for those sins. Come forward and I will pardon you. It might be very possible that one or two of the yokels will say, whoa, 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 no. Fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. You know, that kind of thing, right? Okay. In other words, I don't buy it anymore. Is Chaucer responsible for the beginnings of the skepticism that ultimately will become the central identity of modern and later postmodern thought? That is a compelling question. Do we lay that at Chaucer's feet? Another way to ask this question is, of course, the separate message from messenger. Can a wholly vicious person tell a moral story? Can a father who is smoking a cigarette be effective in telling his kid, don't smoke? Now, before we jump too heavily on adults who are hypocrites, let's remind ourselves that here in a few years, we will be the adults, and we will be the parents, and the question will be, for you as a parent, when your son or daughter asks you, hey, Mom, Dad, when you were my age, did you do X, Y, Z? Immoral acts. Did you do X, Y, Z? Question. Do you tell them the truth? Yes, I did. Not proud of it, but I did. Or do you lie and go, absolutely no way? Because you know that if you say, yeah, did it, in their minds, they're going to do what? They're going to think what? Well, dude, if you did it, you obviously can't condemn me for it. I'm going to do it too. It's like a license. Do you tell the truth to your kids someday? Or do you rather lie to try to make sure that they don't do something that is unhealthy for them? Oh, what an interesting question. And if you are found that you are inauthentic with your kids, do they have a right then to disrespect you after that fact? See, I've had students that say, once I found out some stuff about my mom, never listen to her again. But wait a minute, what happens when the shoe's on the other foot and you become a parent?